And so today, we're having Brooke Moffis from Lake County Extension. So UF IFAS, another commercial hort agent. So it's good to um, network and hang out with these folks and hear what other things are going on throughout the state. And so I'm with that. And she's got some cool projects going on. We've done a number of things here with webinars and things from folks that she's worked with. Um, and I think that this is going to be a good continuation of some of the things that we've hit on before in this webinar series with native plants. And so they're increasingly relevant. People have a lot more demand for them. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Brooke here and hear what she has to say.
Hey, thank you, John. I appreciate you having me in this landscape series today. So, like John said, my name is Brooke Moffis. I am the Commercial Horticulture Extension Agent in Lake County. Lake County is right in the middle of the state, so we're close to where the Turnpike and I-75 meet up, and we're just north of Orlando. So, if you've ever been to Mount Dora, Leesburg, Tavares, Claremont, that's the area where I'm in. And it's interesting because in Lake County, we have this little microcosm, if you will, of sustainable landscaping and native plant initiatives going on. We have one of the largest nursery growers in the southeastern United States, Cherry Lake Tree Farm, and they are getting more and more into growing different types of native plant palettes. And then we have Green Owl Gardens, which is another large native nursery grower. And we have cities that are doing a like naturalistic initiatives. They want to support more natives. They want to support native habitat because we're experiencing rapid growth right now. So it's an interesting place to work. Lots of challenges, lots of new ideas coming forward. But first, I'll get into the kind of today's agenda. We're going to talk about the situation in Central Florida, which is very common for you all in South Florida. We're going to get into some of the benefits of native plants. I'm going to cover about 20 or so of the most common native plants that you'll find in the landscapes, and then we're going to get into the challenges. I do like to use the chat, so I like to make it interactive. So if I ask a question, please feel free to just chime in and type in. All right, so globally, something very interesting happened in about 2007, and that is that for the first time in human history, more than half of the humans lived in urbanized situation. Before that, the majority of human beings lived in rural situations, and now our world is quickly becoming more and more urbanized. So our land cover of urbanized situations is expected to increase at a global level. About 66% of residents worldwide will live in an urban area, and urban development causes profound environmental change. So we have lands that were once natural or agricultural that are now going into an urban city type landscapes and residential landscapes. Currently, 2 billion people on this earth do not have access to safe drinking water. And I saw a really interesting stat the other day that said that about half of the world's population will experience water scarcity for at least 1 month of each year. So again, that's half of the world's population will experience water scarcity at least 1 month each year. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, that's shocking. In my county, Lake County, we are in Central Florida's the Lake Wales Ridge. So we have very, very sandy soils, excessively drained, and we have higher topography than a lot of the state. So there were some studies conducted early in the 2000s, and we showed that about 60% of home water use went to urban landscapes. So when it's a resource that is this scarce at a global level, and here in Florida, yes, we have a lot of resources, but we have explosive population growth. We need to figure out how to manage our landscapes to help conserve water. So residential landscapes, you've all heard the story about 1,000 people move to Florida every single day. The last actual stat on that I heard was 900 residents move to Florida every single day, and that was from the Florida Department of Financial Services. Residential landscapes are the most rapidly expanding land cover type in the United States, and they are very homogeneous. So meaning that they a lot of times look the same. If you go throughout Florida, you will notice that a North Florida landscape will oftentimes look like a Central Florida landscape, which will look like a South Florida landscape. We use the same types of plant materials repeatedly, and we kind of get these, looks where everything kind of looks the same. So these landscapes can be highly maintained. They can have a lot of water demands. Like I said, in my area, about 60% of home water use goes to landscapes. And then they can result in habitat loss too, which is a big concern over our rapidly expanding residential land uses. So actually, I want you all to take a look at this picture that I have pulled up, and I want you to tell me how many species of plant materials that you see in this picture. Now, this is of a commercial landscape around a clubhouse, and you can see there's pickleball courts. So that gives you a clue as to where this aerial view is captured. It's where pickleball was created for those of you that play pickleball. So go ahead and type in the chat, how many different species of plants do you think you see in that picture? Aaron says 6, 4, 6. Yeah, you guys are all hitting around the same amount. It's probably a little bit higher than that, but it just goes to show you this is a large area. There's lots of impervious surface, so there's lots of asphalt going on, and then there's very limited plant palette. So I see sable palms, I see like I think maybe some type of juniper, boxwood. There's some oak smattered in there. Canary Island date palms, I believe. And, yeah, this is a commercial property, but it's reflective of a lot of commercial properties in the area as far as plant diversity goes. And this is not good for attracting our native fauna. So our birds, our bees, our butterflies. This does not provide them with a lot of habitat. So you all know the story. This is Lake County's population growth. And you will see that, and I'm sure South Florida is very, very similar. You guys have surpassed us, I'm sure. But it's always shocking to me to see these images. On the far left, this was our 2010 baseline. So this is what we looked like 2010. The red is the developed area. And when you look in the middle picture, you will see that this is our 2070 trend. So this is what Lake County, which was historically rural, as most of our places were, right? Lake County is projected to look like this as far as development goes in 2070 if we continue on our current growth trend. Now, if you look at the last picture on the right, that is our 2070 alternative. You can see there's a little bit more green than the 2070 trend that's in the middle. And this is if we protect our unprotected agriculture lands and if we build our houses 20% denser. So this is, kind of the best case scenario if we were to continue on our current growth trends. And a lot of can happen to our growth trends, right? We've seen that before. If you've been around for any length of time, you can see that that fluctuates. But with this comes stress on water resources, not just from our landscapes, but from home water use, and then also loss of wildlife habitat. So, we're going to talk about the benefits of native plants real quick and how they might be able to be used to help us solve some of these issues. Native plants are adapted to Florida's climate. However, one of the quiz questions that actually quite a few of you missed asked, are native plants more drought tolerant than non-native plants? It's complicated. Don't you love to hear that? But it really all depends. You can't take a plant that's grown in the swampy areas like a scarlet hibiscus and place that in a high and dry area. It's a native and expect it to be drought tolerant. It is native to a spring run. Button bush is native to wetland habitats. You cannot take a wetland plant and then place it in a high, dry, sandy situation and expect it to survive. So you always have to think about right plant and right place. And there's a lot of non-native plants that are just as drought tolerant as our native plants. But I will tell you, there is a whole heck of a lot of research going on in this very topic. And it's interesting, there is one research study that was conducted actually through the University of Florida and Dr. Sandy Wilson's lab. And they were looking at native plants versus their I guess you could say hybridized or cultivars of those native plants that are kind of man-made. And they found that the native plant was actually a little bit more drought tolerant, or I shouldn't say a little bit, it was more drought tolerant than some of the cultivars. So if you took a native hibiscus and a non-native hibiscus, the native hibiscus in essence would be more drought tolerant than the non-native hibiscus. But it's, we can't really say that natives are more drought tolerant because it really all depends on the plant. And there have been other studies that have shown that they require just as much water as non-native plants. So the jury is still out on that. We still need a lot more scientific research. And the example I gave you with the hibiscus, I'm not sure that Dr. Wilson's lab specifically looked at hibiscus, but that's the general idea there. All right, but they are adapted to Florida's climate, and they do provide a sense of place. This is where we could get our landscapes to look a little bit different, maybe a lot different if we actually used native plants that were native to our area. So native plants in South Florida are going to look very different than native plants in North Florida. So I like that aspect of native plants is that they do provide a sense of place. They're going to support native animal biodiversity. So one of the questions was, and I think everybody got this one right, was do native plants support more native fauna than say non-native plants? Yes, they do, because they are adapted. These native animals and these native plants evolved together over the millennia, and they work hand in hand, and those native plants are oftentimes required to support animal biodiversity and to support our native food webs as well. So if we want to have native birds, native bees, other native animals to enjoy through wildlife viewing, then we need to provide some of these native plants that are necessary for them. Sense of place, I mentioned that one already. I like these definitions here. This is by Gail Hansen. She's one of our landscape designers with the University of Florida IFAS, and she calls sense of place the surrounding landscapes, both natural and planned, that influence the design and plant materials to be used. So it's nice if we can, and it all depends, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but if we can create kind of that sense of place in our own yards and make Central Florida look like Central Florida. Another famous landscape architect from a long time ago, he says the failure of modern landscape architecture is the failure to inject meaning. And I thought that was an interesting quote too. The picture that you see in this image is actually in a residential neighborhood, and picture was taken in the Villages, Florida. So they have a pretty strict HOA codes and covenants, but the homeowner was able to show the HOA that they could have a beautiful landscape that doesn't take away from the overall aesthetic and design. And so I felt like I was almost walking like through the Ocala National Forest when I was walking through this residence yard. And I thought that was pretty cool. This is just to demonstrate the point that I made earlier. You need those native plants. Everything is going to be dependent on a plant for support of the food web. So you have to have the plant material that's going to capture energy from the sun. It's going to take it in. It's going to turn it into energy and carbohydrates for other life forms. Then you're going to have caterpillars feeding on, the leaves of that plant. And then you're going to have birds feeding on the caterpillars. And this diagram just shows you how intricate the food web can be and how all of these things rely on each other. And if you were to take out some of these native plants, what happens to that food web? It could potentially crash. So, all right, I like this diagram as well. This is actually from the Hungarian Entomological Society. And this just shows you like how if we can increase our plant diversity, that the amount of different types of plant materials that we use in the landscape and the different forms and structures, how we can increase the amount of life in our landscapes. So I like this kind of very basic diagram, but I think it's cool. It proves a point. So if you all are interested and you want to figure out how your landscapes could support the maximum amount of wildlife, this is called the Native Plant Finder, and it's a website through the National Wildlife Federation. You can log on to the website, and then it will actually show you like how many butterflies, different, not just butterflies, but moths too, Lepidoptera, that these plants will support. So let's look at oak. It doesn't have a picture up here yet on their website, but it says it supports 395 different types of Lepidoptera. So those are moths and caterpillars. And that just blows my mind when I hear it. Now they're lumping oak all into the genus, so they're lumping all the oaks under that. But, if you can grow an oak, place an oak in your yard, it's going to support a lot of these moths and butterflies. Elms on the far right support 131 different types of moths and butterflies. So I'm hoping to see that they expand this and they look at other life forms too that could possibly be supported by these plants. But I think it's pretty cool. So if you're to click, okay, let's say we see hickory, pecan. Um, I can't actually make out how many that supports on my slide there, but it looks like it's 100 and something. So if you were to go to this website and click on that, this is what it would pull up. Hickory, pecan, pignut, bitternut, they would support 191 species of butterflies and moths. So, and you can actually search by your area, and then it pulls up all the different types of moths and butterflies that can be supported by planting these specific trees. Okay, so again, that's through the National Wildlife Federation, and it is the, I have to remember what it's called, Native Plant Finder. So if you type in National Wildlife Federation Native Plant Finder, you will pull this up and you can use this website. I think it's super cool. All right, so let's get into some common native plants, and I'm going to kind of gloss over them unless there's something really interesting, I think, to share with you, because I think a lot of these are very common. You're probably very familiar with them, but I'm just going to kind of skim through and highlight some information about these different species. First of all, there's not, well, okay, as far as our trees go, a lot of our trees that are available in the nursery industry are native. Not all of them. Of course, crepe myrtle's not native, it's native to Southeast Asia, but there's a lot of trees that are native to Florida. But when we start talking about let me rephrase, there are a lot of native trees that are native to Florida, and they are commonly sold in the nursery industry. But now, when we start talking about like ornamental grasses, wildflowers, ground covers, some of these are not so common. Some are, but a lot of these are not so common. So I actually worked on an experiment where we took 26 different native plant species and we tested them with urban soil, and we tested them with compost to see how they would perform. But my point here is that there are a lot of unusual native plant species that could be grown in the nursery industry and used in our landscapes. So, for example, there's a Atlantic St. John's wort that looked very promising in a research study that we worked on. Purple lovegrass looked absolutely gorgeous in the fall, gave us a lot of structural elements and color. And then spotted bee balm was another one that really brought in the pollinators, starry rosinweed. But let me just go ahead and dive into some of these common plants. Eastern redbud. You all are probably going to be a little bit too south, so I'm going to skim over that one. They are more of an understory tree in my area, and I think we're kind of the southernmost point. Red maple is an important wetland plant here in Central Florida, anyhow, and it really, puts on quite a show in Central and North Florida when it flowers in the spring and it pushes out its new growth too. So we've got dwarf Walter's viburnum, which I believe you all can grow down in South Florida. This particular one is called densa, but there's a lot of different cultivars out there. They produce a white bloom in the spring and then a kind of a softer or more subdued bloom in the fall time period. Incredibly drought tolerant, can get tall even though it is a dwarf, but it's slower. The dwarfs are typically slower growing, and they can produce a lot of root suckers, but they can be an extremely drought tolerant plant to have in your landscapes and in your landscape designs. Usually I do one hard pruning a year on it, and I maintain them about 8 feet tall. So you can maintain them quite tall, and they can make a good hedge as well. So flatwoods plum is another plant that I think can be a showstopper in the landscape in the spring. And some of you might be able to do this if you're kind of in the more northern areas of South Florida, if that makes sense. But this one blooms a really nice heavy white bloom in the spring just before it produces leaves. So you want to look for flatwoods plum because some of the other plums that are similar to this can actually have a lot of root suckers, but flatwoods plum is known to not have not quite so many suckers. Then we have Florida privet. This one is going to lose its leaves in the wintertime typically, but it can still form a nice hedge through its twigs and other structures. But a lot of people don't want to lose the leaves on the summer. So this is probably going to be a native more someone that's really into native plants that wants to grow this. It does offer a lot of fruit for birds and other wildlife. We have Yopon holly. There's lots of different cultivars of Yopon holly out there. Uh, it's interesting because we have the standard, which is represented in the right part of the bottom right of the slideshow. So this is kind of the standard Yopon holly that you will see. Then we have a weeping Yopon holly that is absolutely gorgeous, and it will give you kind of this meditation Japanese look to the garden, and it does produce a lot of berries for the birds. And then we have the more standard Yopon holly, which most of you are probably familiar with. I call it the meatball shrub because it stays very, very compact in the landscape, and you can prune it very compact in the landscape. So this is all the same species, and a lot of people don't realize this. These are just different cultivars. So man has discovered and selected for these plants that are showing different attributes. So this, cultivar in the top left that looks like a little meatball, this Ilex vomitoria or Yopon holly was chosen for that compact form. And then someone chose the weeping one for its form. But if you were to go out, say in a wooded area, what you're going to see is the standard form in the bottom right there. Picture of some of the berries. Again, berries are important for the wildlife. The blooms are as well, as they can help support pollinators. Firebush, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this one too. There are some firebush that are native, and there are some firebush that are non-native. The native firebush produces nectar for butterflies and hummingbirds. It can get quite tall, and in my area, it can suffer from a frost or freeze. But I have seen firebush when it's grown more in South Florida, reach heights higher than the actual home. So it can tolerate quite a bit of pruning. We wait for a freeze to come along and knock it back, and then we prune it back in the spring. But you all could probably prune this about any time of year. So it's tolerant of a wide range of soils, and it can grow in full sun to part shade, which is another thing I like about it, is you can grow it in a fairly shady area. Then Kunze, you all have a endangered butterfly in your area that I'm not as familiar with it, the Atla or the Attila butterfly. I could be saying that wrong. So, but anyhow, we don't have it in our area, but Kunze is a host plant for it. So if you want to help support this butterfly in your area, you can grow this. Has a high drought tolerance. In my area, it really needs to be in filtered light or shady conditions, and that's probably the same for you as well. It is the only native cycad to North America, and it does have some moderate salt tolerance. Another plant that I think is underutilized that could be grown more, and I like it because it's a vine and it can give you that vine look, but it's not as aggressive as some of our non-native vines, and this is coral honeysuckle. Hummingbirds will forage off of this. Which I always appreciate seeing those hummingbirds in the landscape. And it's moderate to highly drought tolerant, so it performs quite well in droughty conditions. Here's another one that I think is underutilized too, that could be really great addition to a home landscape, is starry rosinweed. This one will flower throughout the year as long as we don't get frost and freezes. If we do get a frost or freeze, it hits it back to the ground, but then it will come back pretty readily in the spring. And it can take dry to moist soils. The literature says that it will get 3 to about 12 feet tall, but I have noticed that they will typically, in our area anyway, will stay around 4 feet tall, so a little bit shorter than me. Twin flower, this is another one. There's different types of twin flowers. It makes an absolutely beautiful, gorgeous ground cover. It can provide very thick coverage, no supplemental irrigation once it's established, and this one in particular, oblongifolia, can take really dry conditions. So very easy to grow. I expect to see it more in the nursery and landscape industry. It does not require mowing, but it's also something where you cannot walk across it You cannot have an animal that's, going to walk across it either because it will damage it. So this is kind of an area where you're not really going to be walking across it, but you still want a green, low growing ground cover. And then we have swamp twin flowers. So this is in the same genus as the other twin flower I just showed you. This one is going to perform better, just as you would expect, in moderately moist soils. So it needs more moisture than the other twin flower I just showed you. This is actually a common larval plant for the buckeye butterfly. And this is a local nursery here in Lake County that is ramping up production of this swamp twin flower. This could be a great plant to add in between houses when you get that swell that can hold too much water. It can be really nice in that type of situation. All right, here it is growing kind of in a full sunny spot. This is near a stormwater or rain garden, if you will. There's like a stormwater drain close by, and then you see all of this swamp twin flower around it. So this is more of a maintenance type area. I'll show you some pictures here in just a minute where it's maintained a little bit more in between the swells of the houses. So Coreopsis is another one, our state wildflower. So we have lance-leafed Coreopsis and we have tick-seed Coreopsis. They both perform beautifully on limited water, so they can perform really nice, but they are going to need water for establishment like most of these native plants. All right, then we have scarlet salvia as well. This is another one that can reseed easily in the landscape, and it can be a great pollinator plant too, and it's going to be fairly drought tolerant as well. The one downside I would say to this plant in the landscape is that it can get leggy and kind of top heavy, so you need to prune it back to help keep it more compact, or you need to plant plants in front of it or around it so that it kind of blocks that legginess of the plant. All right, moving right along, we have dotted horsemint. This is a fabulous pollinator plant. So you can see how it has these, it's actually not flower petals. It's a different part of the plant that where you will see this purple color, but it's highly attractive to pollinators. And in the bottom right picture, you can see kind of how tall it can get, what it can look like out in the field. So I think it looks best, like a lot of our wildflowers, if you plant it in mass. One plant is probably going to look really weird, one, two, or three plants. So you want to plant quite a few of them to make like this nice stand, kind of like almost like a hedge-like look to it. It can take really dry soils too. Frog fruit is one that can be used as a ground cover. Although, it is going to require maybe more moisture than some other more drought tolerant ground covers. And it really performs nicely when it's mixed in with other ground covers or if it's mixed in with the turf grass. I have seen people struggle to grow this though in really dry conditions. And I have seen fungal issues occasionally in the summertime, although we've never had the fungus identified, but we suspect that we have a fungal issue that can come in the summertime. So, but it can take moist to moderately dry soils, and it supports at least 3 different adult and larval butterflies too. So this is what it looks like in a situation. This is in the Villages again, and this person went all native with their landscape. And the Villages just specified that they needed a ground cover to be below 8 inches height, and they wanted the ground cover to be green up to the street because they wanted this nice green look when people entered the neighborhood and went down the roadways. And so this person was able to achieve that, although I still think they're watering it about the same amount as turf grass. Here's another ground cover that I think can also perform quite nicely. This one can work in the full sun. It can work in part shade as well, although will get leggier and kind of a deeper green color in the part shade. You can mow it, but you don't have to. So if you have it planted in with something else, or if it creeps into a bahia grass lawn, you can mow it to maintain height. But again, you don't have to. This is actually, if you do mow it lower, you can actually walk across this plant. It is an aggressive native. It's not invasive. Invasive means it came from another country, another area of the world, and it's now taking over our native ecosystems. This is an aggressive native. It's a native that can really outcompete things and really kind of take over areas if it's allowed and if it's, if all the site conditions are being met for it. So I do caution people about planting this near a drain field. It does have tap roots that grow very, very deep into the soil. And so you need to be cautious around drain fields with this. But if you are on, city sewer, that type of thing, then it should be no problem. And it also works great in a median too. So this is what it can look like when it's mowed a little bit shorter, and here they're using it as a buffer. So that's just some of the native plants. There are a lot more harder to find native plants that I think could be coming out on the market soon. And one of the reasons for that is there are municipalities and there are communities that are writing native plants into their codes and covenants. So some of them will specify a percentage. Some municipalities I've seen now are saying that 50% of the landscape, when the builder installs it, has to be a native Florida plant. I've also seen where HOAs are saying 75% of the landscape has to be a native plant. Are any of you all seeing this where you live? I know this is South Florida, but we may have other folks throughout the state as well. Are you seeing any of these native plants, codes, covenants, ordinances coming down? Yeah, some of you guys are saying, okay. Michelle's saying, yes, she's seeing it too. So in our area, it's being discussed in a new development called Wellness Way. So some of you are hearing about it, some of you are not, but it is a global initiative. And what I mean by that is just different municipalities and different areas around the globe are encouraging native plants. And I think so much of that is because of our habitat loss and therefore our potential wildlife loss when we don't have these native plants to support our native wildlife. So, if you look at Australia, they are very prominent in the native plant scene. We have even more northern states here in the United States. They're going with these native plant initiatives too. So, yeah, someone's saying it would be helpful to make people more accepting. If we have these codes and covenants that are passed, what's that going to do to the native plant grower or to the landscape industry? It's going to drive up demand, right? And so we got to learn how to propagate some of these native plants to get them ready for the market. So that actually leads me into my next discussion. Soil health is a big issue with native plants. We're going to talk about industry supply, lack of research. The aesthetics is something to overcome, and then we'll talk about weed competition too. So, for the development process, you all know this. Everyone on this call is from Florida, I assume. So you have seen this time and time again. When we go into a new development, I'm saying we, like if I'm the builder developer, we go in and we grade the land. We remove all the vegetation, we put it up into these big piles and we burn it. Then we take heavy equipment over that soil and we drive back and forth over. And not just that, we actually take soil from 20 feet below and we put it on top of the land to be graded to help dig out stormwater ponds and to help drive water flow. So this is something that happens all over Florida because the big concern with building these developments is building the home, of course, right? But also keeping water flowing in a direction that's not going to be detrimental to the building or to the houses or the neighborhood once they are installed. So, but it's not a good situation for our plant materials because we are taking this soil. Again, we're taking subsoil from 20 feet below, we're putting it on the site, and then we're driving heavy equipment over it. And then the homeowner is stuck with it. And, they buy the property. They don't realize that their soil's terrible, that it's compacted. They're trying to grow turf grass on it, and then they're trying to irrigate the turf grass. A lot of times the soil is so compacted that when they irrigate, the water's actually going just out into the street and it's being wasted. So this is one of the reasons we use so much water in our landscapes is because the soil conditions are so crummy. So, all right. So this was another one of your quiz questions. Soil that is made from a material like we're discussing, basically it's non-agriculture. It's a man-made surface. It's greater than 20 inches thick, and it's produced by mixing, filling, or contamination of the existing soil. The definition for that is actually called urban soil. So again, if it's non-agriculture, it's man-made, greater than 20 inches thick. We're mixing, filling, driving over it with equipment and that type of stuff. That is the urban soil definition. And I want to show you just how compact some of this is. Okay, so this is a neighborhood that's coming in near me. And this is what that site looks like. And you will see that there looks like there's builder's sand that's brought in. There's some other light colored soil that looks very sandy that was brought in. And then you have this subsoil that's laid out. Very little topsoil can be seen here. So this is all going to be get spread out, and these homeowners are going to have pockets of sand probably in their yard and pockets of problematic areas potentially in their yard too. So this is very common throughout Florida with the way we develop our land. This is just to show you how compact urban soil can be. This is me actually at a study site, and this was after the second land grading, and I am on a soil probe, and I have my full body weight on it, as you can see, and I cannot get that probe to get 6 inches into that soil. So, I mean, that's how compact it can be. So, what happens when we drive all this heavy equipment over it? Well, soil is about 50% pore space and it's about 50% mineral. That pore space can be filled by either water or air, depending on rainfall or irrigation. But when we compact it, we squash down the pore space and we make it to where the water can't filter into the soil as much. So we get reduced pore space, we get poor drainage, poor aeration, and the soil can actually even be too dense for roots to grow through it. So, some of the things that we can do with this urban soil is we could select plants, we could do soil test, and then we could select plants that are tolerant of those types of soil conditions, or we can try to remediate the soil by using compost. So this was a research project I worked on where we tilled compost into the top 4 to 6 inches of the soil, and then we grew 26 different native plant species, and we recorded which ones thrived and which ones failed. And we looked at the urban soil that did not have the compost, and we looked at the soil that had the compost, and then we looked at native plant health. What we found, we also irrigated as well, and we found that when we had the compost, we could irrigate as needed versus weekly irrigation and still maintain a nice visual quality of the plant. So we watered some of the plots weekly, we watered some of the plots just as needed, but like I said, that compost helped us maintain a nice quality more so than the weekly irrigation did. So we ended up with an 80% water savings just by watering as needed versus weekly irrigation. So I think this is a big area. I know I just gave you like a really in-depth research project in like 2 minutes of a description there. But I really think there's a lot of potential to where if we can just manage the irrigation clocks and only water as needed, that we could greatly reduce the amount of water that actually goes into our landscapes. So, but anyhow, that's a whole nother talk. I believe my advisor talked about it last year, and I told John I'm willing to come back on and give you guys some updates next year too. So, but anyhow, you can see at the bottom left what the native plant, I believe this was purple lovegrass, and you can see no compost on the left with, and then compost on the right side. So you can see, you know, how much larger those plants were, healthier they looked too. So those are just a visual representation of what's going on. Okay, so managing urban soils is an issue. We're still trying to kind of figure out how to do that to grow a lot of these native plants, since again, the soil is very non-native. It's man-made, it's urban soil. All right, so other issues. Let's see. Some natives are better in poor soil. Maybe just till without adding compost in some areas. Yeah, okay. Let's talk about that. So I actually presented our research on compost and native plants at a big symposium, and this was a couple years ago. And one of a landscape designer that was there said, no, 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 you're thinking about this all wrong. You should look at what that soil is like and then select native plants based on that soil type. So there's different schools of thoughts out there. Um, but these urban soils can really fluctuate with the amount of nutrients and you know, the different types of soil properties that they have. But I think that is a good thought process. And if we can find some of these really tough plants and we don't add compost at all, and we do minimal irrigation and they can thrive in these crummy soils, then great, let's do it. So I appreciate the feedback. I like it when you guys chime in. It helps make this talk more enjoyable for me too. All right, so here's an issue. We worked with this development and they wanted to do 75% of their plant materials native. It is a massive development. It's like I think the potential build out is 33,000 homes. And I'll say that again, 33,000 homes. That's like triple the current little town that I live in. So it's a massive build out. It's south of the Orlando airport. But they have in their codes now that they're going to do 75% native. They started installing these landscapes and quickly found that they couldn't find some of the plants that were specced out on the list. So we had a situation where I believe cinnamon fern, which is a native plant, was specced out, and instead, I believe either a Boston fern or an invasive sword fern was planted in its place, which is not what we want to happen, right? So that shows you that we do have a limited supply of native plants for all these codes and covenants that are coming down the pipeline. So I think we're really going to see native plant production start to increase. It's increasing in my county already. So industry supply is an issue. If there's enough demand and enough of these codes and covenants coming in, I think we'll see the increase. Let me just check the chat real quick. Yeah, someone's saying the industry needs to catch up. Well, if these codes and covenants are passed, I believe it will. But, we could get into a situation too where people are just growing the same few native plants over and over and over again to check that box. So we need to make sure that we're really exploring lots of different species of native plants. Another thing to overcome is aesthetics. It looks different, right? It doesn't look like this high monoculture type landscape. This was actually my district extension director. So she is in charge of about 13 different counties in Florida. She was in France, of all places, and she said, I want to send you this because I was really questioning why this place, everything looked kind of grown up and unkempt around their university. And she said, I talked to one of the professors there and they said, oh, we're trying to support biodiversity. But she said, once she started looking around, it actually looked pretty nice because there were enough structures and enough pathways and enough garden features that even these areas where they just let them go to seed, if you will, and grow up as a meadow, she said were actually quite attractive. But at first, she was scratching her head trying to figure out what was going on. So this is kind of we're trying to grow more native plants and landscapes for some of their benefits, or at least we're looking into it. This is kind of a extreme version of that, I guess you could say, where they've kind of let the plants come in and then they're removing the invasives and they're kind of growing like these big meadow type areas. So again, it does look different. This is another one of the model homes that we were working on. You can see we've got a tree, we've got some shrubs there, and then we have a ground cover. So quite a bit different than our typical landscapes. This one I think looks quite lovely. Again, this is an established landscape in the villages and it's all native plants. So the homeowner took the time to get a nice landscape design put together to show the villages that this native landscape can be attractive. But, it looks quite different than the neighbor. If you look right past the fire hydrant, you see kind of a typical Central Florida landscape there. So all right. There is a lack of research too, but I feel like at least the University of Florida, we're really ramping up in our native plant research, and I'm seeing some other universities around the country. Mizzou, of all places, in Columbia, Missouri, they have quite a bit of native plant and pollinator research going on, which is pretty cool. So, I just wanted to check on twin flower. It's one of the plants that I told you about that I think has a lot of potential in the landscape industry. And I wanted to see what type of resources were out there for how to maintain it. Should we mow it? Should we fertilize it? What should we do with this plant? And so when I pulled it up, the responses I got, now I'm looking on Google Scholar, is plant response following soil disturbance in a longleaf pine ecosystem. Ground cover recovery patterns and life history traits, implications for restoration obstacles and opportunities in a species-rich savanna. Whew, say that 3 times fast. Vegetation of the Everglades. So you can see there's no research on how to maintain this plant. It's used for ecological restoration and it is a native plant. So there's a big area to research a lot of these things more in depth. All right. Weed competition. Oh, this was the picture I was going to show you. This is the swamp twin flower. Remember how I showed you the one picture? It was a little bit messier looking. They were using it more near a stormwater drain or in a rain garden. This is where they've, planted it and it's grown in nicely in between the swells of a house. On the right, you can see that we're getting a lot of weed competition here. So that can be a concern when we are planting some of these native landscapes. So I think. I know some people are opposed to this, but I do think if we can use a pre-emergent herbicide at the time that we plant these plants, we can really help with weed competition to where we're not having to use more herbicides later down the road. And we can minimize hand pulling and hoeing and all these very labor intensive type things. So, weed competition can be more so than what you would have in a sod type situation because when you're laying down turf grass sod as your ground cover, you're blocking weeds. You're laying it directly on the soil and you're blocking weeds from sunlight. But when we're trying to grow these ground covers, we're planting them in the landscape and then we're getting weed competition because those weeds have lots of areas and gaps. So it takes a lot of these ground covers a year to 2 years to fill in to where they will outcompete the weeds. So I think if we can go in initially with a pre-emergent herbicide to keep those weeds at bay until it knits in, it's going to be better success. So the another thing that could be done too is that these native plants could be grown as a sod potentially. I don't know. We'll see. So there's some research that needs to occur in that area too. So yeah, someone said the more shade tolerant twin flower does not need any trimming and thrives in deep, dry shade. And it's lovely. Yeah, you don't have to make, once you get this thing knit in, and when I say knit in, like established to where the plants are touching each other, you don't have to do anything to it after that. So another thing that we need to wrap our brains around too, if you're a traditional horticulturalist like me that's kind of diving into this native plant world, is herbivory. So herbivory is, when plants are getting chewed up by insects or maybe even animals. Um, we actually kind of want to see this in a native plant landscape because we're trying to support wildlife and life. And I am from a integrated pest management background. I worked in the ornamental horticulture industry. So for me to allow chewing on plants, I had to wrap my head around this and kind of make some adjustments to my way of thinking. Now, what was funny, with the research project that I've briefly mentioned to you all, is we're trying to support caterpillars, we're trying to support birds, right? When we planted the experiment just a couple weeks later, or it may have been about a month later, deer came in and mowed everything to the ground. I don't have to deal with deer too often in my area because we're highly urbanized, so it was not even a thought. And we all got so upset that the deer came in and mowed everything to the ground. And then we kind of laughed about it because we're like, well, they're wildlife too. So which wildlife get to stay and which wildlife get to go? So it's just been this interesting thing. We ended up, there was a big fence and we just made sure the gate was shut and then we were able to get everything established, exclude the deer, but also support some of the caterpillars and pollinators. So, like I said, I know that this is a different type of mind shift. Integrated pest management, that leads me to pest management. IPM is using various tools and techniques to control pests. So, what you're going to want to do if you need to control pests in the landscape and you have a lot of natives and you're trying to support wildlife, you want to monitor for pests and catch them early. Maybe you can simply prune them off the plant, get rid of them. Maybe you can hose it down with a hard stream of water. If you need to use a pesticide, say to control mealybugs on giant ironweed, you could use a soap or an oil. A soap or oil will kill whatever it comes into contact with, but the residue does not last long at all, and the residue itself is not harmful. So, these are some of the things we need to think about. Pollinator gardening. If you have to spray a plant with a soap or oil, you want to do it early in the morning, late in the evening when the pollinators are not out foraging. Pollinators like it when it's hot and it's full sun. So, 10 to 2 p.m. would be the worst time to go out and try to treat a plant, even with the soap and oil. You do have to be careful with soaps and oils too, because they can burn your plants if we are too hot. So, all right. Just some other things to keep in mind um, is right plant, right place. This is a situation again where I said just because it's native does not mean that it's drought tolerant. This is a Lobelia cardinalis, I believe. So it's cardinal flower. And in this experiment, the designer thought that the soil was wet enough to support this. This plant grows in spring runs. I had my questions from the beginning, knowing that I see this plant when I go kayaking in the Ocala National Forest. But we said, okay, let's give it a go. Let's just try it. Nobody's tried it in the urban landscape. Let's try it. It died a slow, miserable death. It looked great the first year, and then it never came back for us. So you still have to think about the soil type, the sun exposure, the hardiness zone, and you have to think about the pH of the soil. So, growing these native plants in these non-native conditions, there's a lot of thought that needs to go behind it. All right. Fertilization. There's a lot we don't know. It depends on the if you need to fertilize these native plants. Most of them are adapted to poor nutrient soils. So the thought is that we won't need to fertilize them once we have them established. Composting, we did see that it improved quite a bit of the native plants as far as their health goes, as far as how visually good they looked. But it wasn't all the native plants. Some native plants did not perform as well in the compost. Some performed the same, but the majority of the native plants that we saw in this study did perform well with some compost amendments. So we don't know how long the effects of the compost are going to last. And compost has nitrogen in it too. So, that's something we need to think about for protecting water bodies. So there's a lot of research going on in this area. Mulching, and again, I'm just going through some quick stuff right here, closing it out. Mulching, you want to use a fine mulch. So you want to use pine straw or fine pine bark so that these native plants can reseed. You want them to reseed in the landscape. And let's see, I'm actually going to move ahead a little bit. You can see some drip irrigation that we installed in one of our projects. That's a lot of drip irrigation. Most landscapers tell me that they kind of wind it around the plants. So that way we can water at key times and it's directly put down into the soil and we can get pretty efficient with the watering when the plants do need it. But that's another recommendation. Or natural rainfall possibly, but in my area, a lot of these plants really need water at key times of year when we get droughty. So here's another project I worked on with native plants, and that's where we incorporated some ground covers like the frog fruit and the sunshine mimosa, and we incorporated them into bahia grass. And it actually made a really nice lawn that was able to withstand some very droughty conditions. And I took these pictures June during a pretty severe drought. And the picture on the left is a mix of ground covers with bahia grass. The picture in the middle is the bahia grass alone. So by growing some of these ground cover species in with the turf grass, we ended up with a really nice lawn. So here's a picture too of a lawn where we, with one of the wildflower lawns, where you can see lots of things in bloom in the summertime. So these are just some different things that we're experimenting with. Again, I'm kind of giving you all a general overview. Sounds like quite a few of you are pretty knowledgeable about native plants. I'm just going to leave you with some pictures of beautiful landscapes, beautiful native landscapes to show you that it doesn't have to look messy. I know that's a criticism of native plants. This is Cherry Lake Tree Farm in Claremont, Florida. They have Gulf Muhly grass growing. They have a purple love grass, porterweed, I believe sunshine mimosa in that picture. Yeah, I know. I tend to go along sometimes. I get carried away. Someone said a great presentation. If you have to go, I think we're winding down here, John. But I'll show you some more pictures. This is a native landscape grown in the shade. Here is like a low growing lawn replacement, potentially meadow, that I think looks really cool. These were just released by the co-CEO of Cherry Lake on LinkedIn just a couple days ago, and I thought they were cool, so I wanted to add them. This is one of the landscapes we're working on with that large development. Again, we're trying. Things aren't perfect, but we're going in an interesting direction. Here's some examples of ground covers. I think this one on the right is a very stark contrast. You see, I believe it, to be honest, I can't quite make out what the plant is. It's slipped my mind, but you can, it may be a false rosemary possibly, but don't quote me on that. But you can see the stark contrast between a very traditional landscape in the full sun here and the kind of this shady landscape that has this nice native plant. Another native landscape in the villages. Looks like you're walking down a trail. More native landscapes in the villages. I like how they incorporated just this old piece of wood there to make it naturalistic. Cross vine growing on a trellis here. And then a very big contrast with the neighbor's yard in this native landscape. You can see the line right down the middle there. So anyhow, I will close on that because I am over time. I don't know if we have time for questions, John, or not, but I'll throw up my contact information here.
I mean, if folks want to go ahead and ask you questions, that's fine. I mean, if people got to go, they got to go. I understand, but for the sake of like, they can always go and check again later on when I email them as well. So if anyone does have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask directly here.
Yeah, please feel free to put in the chat or ask directly. I'm happy to answer some questions. Someone saying if we wanted to remove some native plants, replace with others, what could be done with them besides throwing them away? If they're in nice shape, you could, I would think possibly the park system might be interested in them, maybe a neighbor. I'm not sure other than that. You have any ideas on that one, John?
I don't think so. Let me see here.
Call your local extension office and see if you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
move it in
we
their garden.
case by case.
hmm
So I got a question. The
Sure.
uh, um and
Oh,
I used to
someone,
be in
oh,
Central
sorry. Go ahead.
Florida originally, but the like I don't know, something that comes up that's a little bit different here is the soil pH. Have you
Oh,
is that something that like you've run across with certain things that like I mean in terms of I guess there are certain species that do pretty well in Central and South Florida that are natives, but maybe the presence or maybe like that they're ecotypes, like or anything like that that might not.
that's a good question. I think a lot of that, is still kind of yet to be determined. But I would say, and someone actually suggested this, Native Plant Society. The
Hmm.
Native Plant Society has a really nice website that you could at least check the pHs of what these plants prefer. Um, in my experiment with the compost, I didn't dig into it too much today because I still have a lot of unknowns. I was telling you all that for most of the native plants, the compost did benefit them, but I don't know why yet. So I'm just now trying to run these very complicated statistics, trying to figure out what soil properties are helping the native plants. I don't know if it's increased nitrogen in the compost or if it's a more acceptable pH. So that's a really
Or
good question, John. But
moisture
we're
retention. Like,
yeah, it could be moisture retention too. So I haven't dug into that yet. But that's coming up very soon. So I'm hoping I can give you guys a really nice in-depth look at that project maybe next year and get into some more of these native plant specific recommendations. But yeah, I don't know.
gotcha.
You all are dealing with a different situation. You're closer to that limestone bedrock layer down in your area,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
get higher pHs.
it's crazy like how in Central Florida when I get soil reports unless they were coming right off of like places where there was dissolved concrete or something like that. Like it was almost always acidic, somewhat acidic. Things tended to be on the acidic side from people's yards. And then when I came here, it was like, wow, it's just basic all the time. Like the
Mm,
groundwater is really basic and um like even when you're outside of like Miami-Dade, in those areas that have the like the lime, almost no soil and it's just the lime rock underneath. There's other parts of South Florida tend to be on that basic side. So,
mm-hmm.
but yeah, I don't know. I saw that there was somebody on here putting in um recommendation for zip codes. There's ways to look at that, but I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think a lot of it just comes down to experimenting and figuring out what works and like we're still figuring it out here too, like with all the different
Mhm.
natives and the palettes and things to add to the palette that can potentially work.
Right.
So,
I'm
but
super curious to know if any HOAs or municipalities in South Florida are
uh,
considering these native plant type ordinances because it's really catching on where I am.
yeah.
So,
Well, I saw somebody in here say that well, there were a couple places or folks that mentioned stuff on the Southwest Florida, but in Southeast Florida, Port St. Lucie, the tradition area, he said that yeah, and then look at it should be. Someone says it. Michelle says it should be mandatory. Yeah, well, I mean,
well,
it just depends. I mean, I could see some places being really strict with it and others not, but I think it looks tradition area in Port St. Lucie looks pretty good.
yeah.
Um,
And then,
so
there are, we're talking about native plants for this talk, but there are quite a few non-natives that can really help, I think, provide structure to our gardens and our landscapes. And there's some that do support wildlife as well. I mean, African blue basil, I know that's more of an herb type plant, but it's also a landscape plant. That thing is great for attracting bees. A lot of different types of bees will forage off of them.
mm,
You particularly see honeybees, which this gets into debate too. Honeybees are not native,
mhm.
but we rely on them so much for pollination and for honey and for other services. So there's this whole interesting debate going on with native plants versus non-native and supporting native wildlife versus non-native wildlife. And so, yeah,
Well,
it's
yeah,
really
and the
interesting.
invasives too, right? Like with the honeybees, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
know that gets to be tricky. I won't even go down that wormhole, but yeah, I've heard a lot from the beekeep, there's depending on what your objectives are. Like,
Hmm.
um, but but yeah, it just seems like in general, like the more information we can get out there and I don't know. Are there any things on the horizon with FNPS like and partnerships with UF and them or like in
Yeah.
terms of
Oh, yeah,
conferences?
absolutely. So, well, I don't know about FNPS specifically. FAN, the Florida Association of Native Nurseries, they worked with us, or at least they were involved on that project that I was telling you all about a little bit. But now this next project that we're working on, we're working with a grower, actually another grower in my county. So like I'm in like this native plants or sustainable landscape zone here in Lake County right now. But anyway, there's another grower in my county that's more traditional, wants to grow some more of these traditional Florida friendly landscape species. And natives are considered Florida friendly landscaping too, by the way. So they do kind of fit under there. But there's other plants that we see, common in our landscapes. Trying to think of some examples right now. I've been talking about natives so much, I can't think of one of these common plants. Um, yeah, we'll just say hibiscus, for example, So anyhow, we're working with this one grower and he has a mix of Florida friendly and native plants. And he wants to take all these different types of builder soils, put them on his farm, and then grow all these different plant palettes to see how much he can drive down water use. He's going to do some with compost amendments and some just with these urban only soils. And then he's going to do some plots, mixing these only soils with compost amendments. And so, again, it's a mix of Florida friendly, more traditional type plants, and then also some Florida friendly native plants that are in there. And then Florida Association of Native Nurseries is working on that project with us a little bit. And so is actually the Nature Conservancy has been a bigger player with that project too. So you're going to see more partnerships, I believe, with UF and the Florida Association of Native Nurseries. So yeah, we're
Very
already seeing
cool.
it. Yeah.
It's cool to see that like there's been such a um I mean almost a sea change going on and that and more discussion about all this.
Hmm.
So
People
well,
are asking about CEUs, John.
yes, yes. So I've got you covered. I mean everything. Um, I mean I think we had all of the major categories that I normally offer on this one. I even was able to get uh the FDAC CEUs. So as long as you there should have been something when you joined asking like for your uh basically like your certificate numbers and that type of thing. if I did not get those, I asked for them a couple times just to like cover all the bases. I asked for them at Eventbrite as well. Uh, if I for some reason need to go back and get like your IDs in order to process everything, I'll follow up with you. So just no worries, but I will get everything processed like normal here. And I don't know. I've run into one issue with FDAX, but with the new uh I guess system that they've got, but uh, overall it seems to be working pretty well. So have you had any problems with like the FDAX system at all, or like the
Oh, no. The only issue that I am seeing that has happened with quite a few pesticide applicators is that if they sign into the new portal with a new username, uh, and it's not linked up to the email that they used in the past, they actually have to
ah
contact FDAX and get that linked up. So I've had a lot of pesticide applicators were calling me early on saying, I'm not in the system, but I know I have a license. And so you just have to send an email to FDAX and tell them to link up their new portal username with their old email. So
that might be something that
those of
like
you
I've
needing
okay.
CEUs, if you're having an issue on the portal, that's what you got to do. It's not linking up always. And I've found that they've been pretty quick to turn that around. So, okay,
Huh.
more questions are coming in about the natives. Someone said, do they advise against fertilizer, especially on natives? The thought would be that, natives are adapted to our natural areas and shouldn't need additional fertilizers. But again, we're growing them on very non-native soil conditions. So the research is, I think, still yet to be performed on that. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, we would say not to use as many fertilizers, but it's a weird situation kind of with these urban strange soils. Some areas in South Florida are requiring a percent of natural vegetation. Okay, yeah. I saw someone else posted about that. So you all are seeing a little bit of this going on in your area.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of it. All right, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm launching the post quiz here, and I guess we'll just wrap up. And if there's anything else, you guys can still ask questions here, but the quiz it's commenced. I can see some folks are starting to fill it out. Yeah, and some people you might not see the quiz if you've got certain pop-up blockers on your browser, it might not pop up. So you can try and go through the settings for your browser and see if you can free up the um, for the specific page, like you can disable it, but if not, don't worry about it either if you can't see it. All right, I'll give it another half minute here.
Just wanted to say thanks to everyone. I appreciate the feedback and the interaction.
Yeah, I think you were I liked the topics that you covered. It was very I felt like it was very holistic, like the different things you were able to cover in an hour here.
I might have been a little ambitious. I thought, gosh, this could be a whole presentation on its own, just one little section, you know? So,
Well, I think you're where a lot of people in the trade like they're already have some idea about them, and so I think you hit on a lot of different things like that are useful. So,
okay,
uh,
good. Yeah, there's still a lot we don't know. There's still a lot of research that's yet to be conducted, but I'm excited to be at this nexus, I guess you could say. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, it's a I mean, I feel like that there's a lot there with nurseries and sourcing and then like making it work. What does it look like when, yeah,
Yeah,
So,
I will tell you that the developer that we've worked with, it was not always a bowl of cherries as far as like, like I said, the one time they couldn't find the plant, they were not happy with frog fruit's performance, so they ripped it
mm,
all out. I mean, so I think there's also an education that we need to get into these developments at the very beginning stages, and I would like to put this charge on the extension agents themselves. Like,
mm,
let's get in with these HOAs and let's teach people what to expect. This plant is going to, if we get a frost or freeze, I mean, y'all don't deal with that as much as us, of course, but maybe you don't deal with that at all. But, it's going to hit starry rosin weed and it's going to look completely brown. Don't prune it. It's going to come back in a month. These landscapes are seasonal, some of them. And so I think we have to be very thoughtful about how we design for seasonal interest and seasonal coverage because there are some wildflowers that are going to go completely dormant but they're going to pop back up. So maybe we mix those with an ornamental grass that, blooms in the fall or, it's a totally different way of I say it's a totally different way of thinking, but I don't want it to intimidate anybody about it because really in my landscape, I'm probably 60/40. I probably have 60% native plants, 40% non-native. And I
yeah.
just started adding native plants. I didn't make a big deal about it, just when I went out to a local grower and, do some shopping there at a native plant nursery and incorporate it. But then, heck, in my landscape, the plumbago looks great right now. It's non-native. It's very, very drought tolerant. So I think there's ways that we don't have to be so hard and fast about this being native or this being not native. Like, let's incorporate more native so that we can help support more wildlife in our areas. But so I think it doesn't have, I mean, you can do what you want with your landscape and depending on HOA rules and that type of thing. But I don't think we have to be so hard and fast about it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I mean, it's the same deal like with if you're just even looking at it from our arboriculture perspective, like there's lots of non-natives that like they're going to last longer than some of the natives. Like there's different advantages and disadvantages. Like if you're trying to look at ecosystem services and disservices, like every time you're having to like tend to a tree too much because of certain problems with it, sometimes certain natives might have traits that aren't that great. So not all there might be things you bring in that are more wind resistant or they internalize decay better. So and and I guess to one of the further points back that you were talking about getting in with the HOAs earlier on, do you know Elise Wilson at all? Like
No.
she was one of Andrew Kozer's grad students and she did a lot of work with HOAs and looking at incentives and disincentives like for HOAs, and I'll try to remember to follow up with you on this, Brooke. But she this could be something that like might line up as well for something to like look at down the road is like providing incentive structures with for having certain plants and incorporated and like if they do go native for a lot of their certain percentage or something.
Hmm.
So so um can you see the window here, Brooke? Like or
Of the chat or
of the the questions. So I wanted to like just cover
over.
the questions real quick. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, the quiz.
Oh
I
gosh,
tried
I'm
to
not
share.
seeing it for some reason. John, if you'll read the question, then I'll go over it.
Yeah. So number one, native plants are generally best at supporting native fauna. True or false?
That one's true. So
So
there's been plenty of scientific research out there to show that generally native plants do support native fauna.
we got 90% on that one. Actually, just for all of them, just I'm letting you know, like they got 90% for every question.
Oh,
So
really?
so number two, are native plants more drought tolerant?
Yeah, that one I would say it depends.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah. I don't think we can make that sweeping statement with it. And I hear people say that a lot. And I'm like, "Well, hang on a minute,
yeah, yeah.
No.
Yeah, it depends on like I mean, you've got drainage classes and then the adaptedness to drainage class is like that's really I feel like that's why it depends. So uh
Mhm.
3, what is the soil name for soils um that were or developed from mixing and filling and contamination?
And that was the urban soils.
Yeah, oh yeah, sorry. I forgot to name them off. Degraded soils, disturbed soils, urban soils, and construction soils. And yeah, the urban soils.
And I didn't mention this, that is actually a definition. The soils, there's soils are categorized kind of like plants and animals where we don't call it the same thing, but they have like a order and a suborder and a subgroup, this type of structure. And so that one is actually a that's a definition for an urban soil is the mixing, filling, contamination. So that's actually considered a soil type by whoever the powers that be that come up with these soil names.
Yeah, USDA, NRCS, I don't know. Some of
Mhm.
those folks in there, but um yeah, the soil I think yeah, soil taxa or taxon. I think that's like it's just like yeah, how we think about animals or something. Wow, that's
Mhm.
so anyway. Um all right. Well, I guess with that, I know we went a little over, and thanks for those that did manage to stick around. Everybody else, like, we'll go ahead and send out the email. I'll take care of everybody's CEUs, and yeah, you'll have a link to this webinar that'll be up from YouTube. But yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and thank Brooke for being here and spending this nice lunch hour, extended lunch hour with us and educating us on more about natives and what's on the horizon here with them. So so
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, John. Thanks everybody again. I enjoy the interaction.
all right, everyone, take care. Thanks again, Brooke.